John chapter 9. Jesus heals a man born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. The Pharisees investigate the healing. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Spiritual blindness. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus asked, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
My name is Mac Potts, and I'm a piano player.
I'm Cindy, and I'm a PhD student.
Are you blind?
Yeah, I am. Total blind.
I was born totally blind.
Being blind, what are annoying questions that people ask you?
Oh my God, annoying things people ask.
People ask me, so how do you go to the bathroom? I don't know, I learned when I was little. I've never known any other way. I don't really know how to answer their question.
How much time do you think we have today?
How do you do your job?
How can you find the bus? You're blind.
You organize people's voices.
Can I pray for you? Can I bless you?
How do blind people have sex? Well, some of the most intimate things are done in the dark anyway. Think about it, you visual people.
Do you see anything? Do you see any sun? Can you see any light?
You can see, can't you?
Sir, how long have you been, visually, you mean blind? And they're like, yeah, that. I'm like, it's okay.
People want to know how I've lost my vision, and like, I don't really want to talk about that with strangers, you know?
I think that's a very personal question, and usually it's irrelevant.
Let's just be real, the elephant's in the room.
What do you feel like when people ask you those questions?
I feel like they are probably imagining that they don't know what they would do or how they would function if they lost their vision, so they can't even articulate a specific question to ask me.
How about annoying actions or things that people do?
Yes, there's a lot. If I am walking down the street trying to find an establishment or an address, but I'm confused, I'll say, oh, excuse me. I can hear people walking by, they won't answer, they'll just keep walking. Or they'll try to stay quiet thinking that I won't know that they're there.
So sometimes I'm saying something and I might offend someone and they just kind of walk away in the middle of a conversation, so I'm suddenly talking to myself.
What do people do to you that irritates you?
Because you're blind, you can't wear fancy dresses.
Why do you wear fancy dresses?
Because I like it.
Oh, well, I'm totally in your situation because like 3 months ago, like I twisted my ankle and I had to use a crutch for like a week. So I totally understand your world. And I'm like, not exactly. And I don't want to like discredit those experiences that people have, but they have no idea.
I've dated some blind people, and sometimes people will be like, hey, do you realize your girlfriend's beautiful? I'm pretty sure they already felt like whatever I look like is beautiful, and they don't need someone in public to let them know.
Sometimes people talk to me in my ear really loud, like I'm deaf, and I'm really confused because they think that blind people have better hearing, but then they yell right in our ear.
Do you ever get annoyed when people try to help?
The most annoying thing people do is grab me.
They'll grab you,
Grab a hold of my arm and start pulling me.
pull you along
Pull me by the arm,
Push me.
to let me know that it's okay to cross the street or go through the door.
and I have to just politely get, no, I take your elbow.
They should be asked first, do you need any help? Talk to normally.
And let me have the opportunity to respond whether I want you to help me or not.
Sometimes I need the help and I ask for help, and I'm totally willing to accept help.
There's tons of blind people in this city going around doing things every day, working, playing, at the bar, wherever, right? It's kind of crazy, actually, just some of the strange things that people believe about something that they don't know anything about.
Hello everybody, how are you all doing? A little bit tired? I know spring is just around the corner, but we are all tired. We've been worn down over these past 2 years of buckling down, and these have been all good things for us to help us get through, but it's taking a toll on us. So how about I give all of us permission? I give you permission to let things go. How about we take a Omicron sigh? Let's all take a deep breath and just let it out. It's okay. That I think really helps. And I think we all kind of need to let this pressure valve open up a bit so we don't end up being all stuffed up like a pressure cooker. So there we go. God is with us. So blind people responding to annoying questions. What do you think about that? Wasn't that great? That to me was really eye-opening. There is so much that I didn't know, and hearing from these blind people, it really gives me a new perspective and understanding of what it is like to be blind. So we are a few weeks from Lent, and what I want to do is to start a short series on blind religion. We'll be kicking off a familiar story in John 9, and it's the miraculous healing of a man who was born blind. But before we move on, Let me try to anchor today's story because it's so long with the main point. Here's the main point. Jesus challenges our assumptions, our religious assumptions, to reveal our blind spots. So Jesus challenges our religious assumptions to reveal our blind spots. So when we think of miracles, biblical miracles, especially the ones that Jesus performed, we kind of bundle them all together. Oh yeah, the healing of the blind. Yeah, that happens all the time and throughout the Bible. Well, actually, this story is actually the first time in all of biblical record that we see a person who's actually healed of his blindness. So from Genesis all the way to John, no prophets, no priests, no apostles has ever healed and given sight to a person born blind. So this is the very first record that we have. And if we look at Psalms and in Isaiah, this is what it says. The Lord gives sight to the blind. The Lord lifts up people who are in trouble. The Lord loves those who do right. The blind people will see again, and the deaf will hear. So these two passages, they remind us that sight giving, healing of the blind, is the work of God. And it was prophesied through Isaiah that the Messiah will do this. So when Jesus arrived, he demonstrated this, proving that he was the Messiah. So the miracle in John 9, it's a long story. There are a lot of characters involved, and there are at least 7 mini scenes, and in each scene a question is raised by the characters. So we're going to look at some of these questions as they guide us through this passage of healing from our blindness. But the underlying discussion with all these healings is this question about Jesus. Who is Jesus? What kind of man is he? And alongside this main question is the question of sin. Who sinned? Who's at fault? So let's look at this story starting in verse 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So this is a congenital blindness. It wasn't caused by illness or accident. This man was born this way. And at that time, this was a life sentence for you. You would have a life of begging. And so the disciples, they saw him on the streets begging. So they asked Jesus this question, Rabbi, who sinned, this man here or his parents? So this is the question that launches into the miracle. So it's a very interesting question and a very human one. And their question comes with a number of assumptions. So the first assumption is this. They assume that physical ailments, illness, and disabilities, it's directly connected to sin. So that's assumption 1. And there's a second assumption, assumption 2. It's assumed that there are 2 parties that would be responsible for his condition, either the man right there or his parents. What do you think? Are these reasonable assumptions? Who's to blame for this poor man being blind and begging? So let me ask you to think of someone with a congenital condition. They're sick or something's causing them some sort of handicap. Would you frame them with these assumptions? So the disciples had an interesting worldview, and this is what I found. At that time, it was commonly held that diseases or illnesses or disabilities was the result of sin. And there's a rabbinic saying that seems to support this thinking. There is no death without sin, and there is no suffering without iniquity. So is this true? Is sin equal to disease and disability? Well, I would say yes. It is a reasonable assumption, but from a wider perspective. All suffering, all human suffering and hardship is the result of sin. Paradise and perfection was suddenly disrupted when sin entered into our world through Adam and Eve. So yes, sin leads to disorder and degeneration and death. From our lived out experience, we experience this. The reason that we have been suffering these past 2 years through this pandemic is because we're in a fallen world. Sin is the reason why we have things like viruses and cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer. However, I think it would be wrong-headed to blame every sickness and disease to a specific sin or an individual. It would not be right for me to point a finger and say, the CEO of Petro-Canada, I blame you for my lung cancer. Or to say, Steve Jobs, his phone tech is evil and has resulted in teen suicides. Or when others point to us and me saying, bring your Chinese virus back to China. So you can see this is very short-sighted and wrong-headed. But this is how the disciples were framing this man's suffering. They were short-sighted with their assumptions. I think another way to put it is maybe this thinking. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. So it's applying this universal law of you reap what you sow. Do something bad's going to happen. Do good things, you will reap goodness. So we live in a very complicated world, and in reality, life is much more complicated than this kind of way of thinking. So let's look at Jesus' response. What does he say? He says this, "It was not that this man sinned, or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." So the disciples didn't expect to hear this answer. He says, no one. You can't blame this man, nor can you blame his parents for his blindness. It's not the principle of reaping and sowing. But Jesus gives a much deeper answer. So he answers their questions not in categories they were using. They wanted an explanation, cause. What's the root? Who's to blame? But Jesus doesn't go there. He gives them an explanation in a different category. He answers them in the category of purpose. Not blame, purpose. And he makes it very clear to them. It wasn't sin. So sit with that for a moment. Specific suffering is not always connected to a specific sin. Jesus says that the past things that happened aren't always connected to the suffering that you're going through now. So the purpose, though, the purpose of his blindness is so that God's work might be seen. And this is the key to understand. Verse 3, that the work of God might be displayed in him. So Jesus says that the purpose of the blindness is to display God's wonderful work. So what does that mean? Does this mean that for suffering to have meaning, we're to look through the lens of God? I think so. Ultimate meaning can only be found in God. If we only look at our current situation and our hardship, we will never find any meaning. So we must always look to God and his purpose. A lot of things in this world make no sense until we've been given God's insight. So yes, there are specific causes to specific sufferings in this world. Yes, some of them are your fault, some of them are not. But those things that happen to you don't determine the meaning of your mess or pain. What is decisive is God's purpose. God's purpose for your mess and pain will always be for his purpose. And we saw this in the story of Joseph last week. So I think this raises an uncomfortable question for me. Does this mean that God is the author of life messes? Does he pre-plan or preordain you and me to go through hardship? So this child, is he born with blindness and disability because God willed it that way? Well, this would be my question to Jesus. But I have to be careful here because I don't believe that God deliberately causes human suffering. I don't believe he pre-plans harm and disability to come to anyone. He doesn't do this so that his main reason is to jump into the scene, perform a miracle. Ta-da! I am the hero of the situation. You know, to me, this is cruel, this is contrived, and it would completely contradict my understanding of a good and loving Father. A loving father would never do this to his child. So in this situation, when the disciples pointed to that blind beggar, Jesus saw an opportunity. He took the opportunity to display God's goodness. Verse 6, having said this, he spit on the ground. He made some mud with the saliva and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. The word means sent. So the man went, washed, and came back seeing. So this was a miracle. Jesus had bent the rules. He overruled the laws of nature, so this man was given sight again. So this detail here I find a little bit odd. Spittle. He uses spit to make mud and put it on his eyes. And that is a bit of, that's kind of yuck, right? How does spit factor into the healing? Well, as I have read, at that time, there's a certain practice that saliva was a way to treat eye ailments. So maybe Jesus has taken this symbol to show people that he was giving treatment, but one that would bring full sight. Or maybe he was reminding people of the symbol of what had happened in Genesis, what God did during creation. In Genesis 2:7, the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. But Jesus took the initiative. The man actually didn't ask for healing. Jesus went to him. Even though Jesus initiated, he had some expectations. He expected some response, a response of faith. He expected this man to do what he told him to do. And the healing actually didn't happen until he took steps of faith. So he says to the man, go and wash. So at this point, the man was still blind. And so with mud on his eyes, he couldn't see anything. He was probably wondering, what is this? This is foolish. It makes no sense. This is dumb. So he could have thought of 100 reasons why this was foolish. But he went. He believed and he took some faith. So with his hands and his feet, he felt his way down to the pool. He went into the pool, washed off the mud, and suddenly, for the first time in his life, his eyes were opened and he could see. So this is a happy ending for him. It was his second chance at life, and you would expect his family and friends to gather around him to applaud and to celebrate. And I think now comes the most fascinating part of the story, the reactions of the people. And let's look at some of their reactions from the questions they ask. So in the first part, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? How then were your eyes opened? Where is this man? So this man has been walking around like a seeing normal person. And he's obviously causing people to turn their heads. People are taking second glances and scratching their heads. What? Isn't this the guy? How can this be? Could it? So they were all perplexed and bewildered. And honestly, if I were there that day, I would be just as stunned as them. I would be skeptical. I would find it very hard to believe that a blind man would suddenly see again. And that's kind of the way my brain is hardwired. Coming from a science background, truth, what is real, is measurable, it's testable, it's repeatable. But this is not testable or repeatable. About 20 years ago, there was a very well-known spiritual movement in Toronto called the Toronto Blessing, or the Airport Blessing. And at that time, thousands of people, thousands of worshipers from around the city and even from different parts of the world, they flew into Toronto and gathered in this warehouse for a spiritual experience. And I visited this worship service, and it was really different. Very energetic, very musical, and charismatic. People were shouting and laughing spontaneously. And this is the first time I experienced holy laughter. And at the end, there's always a ceremony, a healing ceremony where people came up for prayer and healing. And this is where miracles were experienced. And one common miracle that happened during a particular time was people were having their tooth fillings turned to gold. Yes, the amalgam fillings spontaneously turned into gold. And here's an article from that time. On Wednesday evening, March 3rd, 1999, miracles began happening in people's teeth. On the platform at Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship, people testified to having received what appeared to be gold or bright silver fillings or crowns. Many received 1, 2, or 3 or more, and in some cases, 10 changed fillings. On the Saturday night of the conference, there were 198 on the platform saying that God had given them dental miracle. And by Sunday night, well over 300 people. Our leadership have encouraged people to verify these miracles with their dentist, who in some cases have been understandably hesitant to explain why their patients' fillings have become so shiny and have changed color. Dentists were able to show from their records that gold was put in their mouths previously by dentists and not by God. These people had apparently forgotten that this work had been done. The majority of these miracles, however, seem to be beyond explaining, other than that God had given these wonderful gifts. Miracles. They break the laws of nature, and what Jesus had done was completely outside the realm of science, where there are no logical explanations. It can only be accepted by faith as the work of God. And some people there, they had no idea. They had no idea who Jesus was, but they had witnessed something fantastic and bewildering, something that could only be received by faith. So for some of these people, God's work was revealed right before their eyes. And this incident, it stirred some hearts there. It led them to start their journey of faith. Their spiritual eyes were opened that day. And there are others who already have faith, but their faith was reinforced and strengthened by Jesus' miracle. And I think this happens to you and me too. Don't dismiss the many miracles that you encounter each and every day. Each day, if you think about it, is a miracle. The very fact that we wake up and we take a breath and we have life, that's a gift of God. So as we come to the end, we come to the most interesting reactions. It's the reactions of the Pharisees. And there we encounter religiosity. It's what caused them to be blind spiritually. And when they hear about this man's healing, they're indignant. They take offense. A normal response would be at least that of surprise and to be happy for him. But no, they actually interrogate this poor man. Verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him and how he had received sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. Look at that last verse there. This man could not be from God. They didn't even acknowledge that Jesus was a rabbi. Why? Well, because in their minds, a true rabbi would not violate and break the law of Sabbath. How dare someone heal on God's day of rest? But in reality, I'm pretty sure Jesus did this intentionally. He did this to push their religious buttons. So let's look at this word religiosity. What do you think this means, religiosity? Most people would consider a Christian to be a religious person, and you would probably accept that. But you would probably feel awkward or even offended if someone points out your religiosity. So what does it mean? Here's one definition. Religiosity refers to religious activity in the extreme. It is characterized by excessive involvement in religious practices which entail extreme zeal beyond the norms of one's faith. It can also be described as a state of being superficially religious. So outsiders, people that look from the outside in, they quickly see excessive ways. They see how people can fake or be superficial about their beliefs. And this is not a good thing. But this is how the Pharisees were behaving. Look at the questions they ask. But the others ask, how can a sinner perform such signs? Why? What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? So skepticism. It can be a good thing. But theirs was a closed-minded skepticism, a prideful and arrogant skepticism, which had no room for any new learning. And this is the problem of religiosity. It is a closed set. It is beliefs that don't allow for questions or discussions. It's a legalistic faith which is binaries. It's just ones and zeros, black and white. You're wrong, I'm right. Is this the way that God calls us to live? Is this the way that Jesus calls us to look at Him? I like how this theologian puts it. This is the yoke from which Jesus wants to liberate us. He is more than a priest or prophet or religious genius. These all subject us to religion. He frees us from religion. They all make new religious laws. He overcomes the religious law. So this is why Jesus performed the miracle in the first place and on the Sabbath, to challenge their preconceived notions of what is and what should be. And the Pharisees' questions, how can a sinner perform such signs? So to them, signs and wonders can only be performed by a sinless being, and by their definition, God. God is sinless. This is impossible for this man to do so. Well, this of course is what they couldn't accept. They were blind. Jesus is God. And that's why he's able to perform this miracle and many other miracles. So that's the problem with religiosity. It's not open to the new things from God. It fears change. But God is never static. He's always disrupting our understanding and wanting us to see Him in new ways. So what's an antidote? How do we avoid being closed and judgmental? Well, it's about being open, having an open stance to the things of Jesus, keeping our minds open to the new things of God. So this blind man, he had received both physical sight and spiritual sight. Why? Because his mind was open to Jesus. And at the end of the story and all the interrogation, Jesus comes to him. Verse 35, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked, tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. The man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. So his eyes were opened, which symbolizes the opening of his heart and mind to Christ. So my final and practical question to you is this. How do you keep an open mind to the things of God? Let's pretend that information is like fluid, like water. And fluids require containers, and containers to hold the fluid. So let's take some fluid and pour it. When you pour it into the cup, the fluid takes the shape of the cup. And if your cup is too narrow, let me show you some containers that I have here. So if your container is kind of like this, if it's wide and it's open, then you have a problem keeping everything in because everything spills out. So that's not good. But what if your container is like this coffee mug? It's opaque. Well, it's good in that it has a deeper container, but the problem is you can't really see through it. You don't know if your cup is filled with fluid or if it's contaminated or if you can add new fluid into there. And then we have this tumbler. It's transparent, and you can see what's inside of it, and you can see how full it is, and whether it's contaminated or it has a dead fly inside. So our minds, our brains are like these different containers. And if your container is wide and too open, then all the information you have will kind of swish around and spill out. And it's hard to keep anything inside. And you can be easily carried away by arguments, and you have no conviction because every new information that comes kind of pushes out the old information. On the other hand, if your container is tall and narrow, there's another problem. It's hard to fill it with new information. It's always the same liquid inside because it's hard to get anything new inside. Or maybe if your brain is opaque, then what you have inside is hidden. Others can't see it, and you might not be able to see it. And it's hard for people to point out if there's something wrong there. So, what's the ideal container? Well, I would say it's a container that's more transparent. Not too narrow, but just wide enough. That way you can receive and manage new information and take new ideas to consider. And having an open mind to God means being open to new possibilities. In this way, you are open to being wrong and allowing others to adjust and correct your ways. And it doesn't mean that you go along with everything that comes your way. You don't accept everything because you don't have to believe everything. But you recognize that you don't know everything and that you have blind spots, and you're open to the reasoning of others. And it's about listening to Christ with your heart and putting aside your ego and your pride. Because your ego and your pride, it's like a wall. It's like a lid. It's a lid that covers over your container, and it doesn't allow new things to enter, nor for bad things to be let go of. So ego and pride is what we really need to release. And when we do that, wow, there's freedom, because you don't have to feel that you need to be right or to have to win. It's okay to gracefully receive from others who have better ideas. And this is how God opens our eyes to greater things. When you surrender a little bit more, He will show you more. It's just like His promise to Nathanael in John chapter 1. You will see greater things than this. Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open. So let's hold on to this promise of seeing greater things. May your spiritual eyes be open more and more each and every day. May you see the greater things of God and even heaven. Amen. Amen.